America. Washington Journal continues.
And joining us now from Pittsburgh is Joel Winston. He is a privacy attorney, and he's here to discuss DNA testing services and the genetic data, how that genetic data can be used against consumers. Joel, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Now, most of our viewers have probably seen all of these companies advertising how you can find out about your ancestry by taking a DNA test. But Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer earlier this week called for the FTC to look into this kind of testing. Why is that?
I think the problem stems from the fine print. There are a long list of terms and conditions that are attached to these tests. So when you purchase them, you consent and agree to give away a good portion of your genetic privacy rights as well as most of your legal rights.
And so as is reported by Gizmodo about what these privacy policies are, it says you probably wouldn't hand out your Social Security number without having a pretty good idea of how that information was going to be used, right? That would be dumb. It's extremely sensitive information.
That's true. And the thing about the genetic information, it's even more sensitive. It is essentially the software that is you. It is what determines who you are and your personality, your health issues, and it also connects with your family members and relatives. So we're really just at the tip of understanding what this genetic information and this DNA can do and what it means for us. And so to give it away is really a risky move.
So who regulates these companies? What's the regulation that exists now for these companies, and what protections are in place for consumers who just want to find out just where their family came from?
Yeah, so these companies are regulated by a number of different state and federal laws, but essentially what they're doing is based under contract law. So it's actually the legal parameters of this are thousands of years old, and it's essentially they're asking for your consent to take a license and legal rights to own your DNA and to own the information derived from your DNA. So what they're doing is not necessarily illegal. In fact, it's plainly legal because it's the consumers that purchase the tests and click consent to agree to the terms.
And so you wrote a piece on thinkprogress.org about these companies and the issues that they present. And I want to read a little bit of that piece for you. It says, don't use the Ancestry DNA testing service without actually reading the Ancestry.com terms of service and privacy policy. According to these legal contracts, you still own your DNA, but so does Ancestry.com. The family history website is selling a new DNA testing service. It's called Ancestry DNA, but the DNA and genetic data that it collects may be used against you or your genetic relative. According to its privacy policies, Ancestry.com takes ownership of your DNA forever. Your ownership of your DNA, on the other hand, is limited in years. That sounds really scary, Joel. Explain that to us.
What that basically means is that you have a property right in your DNA because it is in your body, it is in you. So they can't effectively take it away from you because it is still you. But what they are taking in these contracts are a perpetual, worldwide, royalty-free license to use your DNA in any way that they deem that they want to do it, either now or in the future. And so your ownership of your DNA ceases after you pass away. However, they still retain ownership of the actual DNA sample itself and of any information that they can derive from sequencing the DNA, either with technology that now exists or any technology that could exist in the future.
Okay, we are talking with attorney Joel Winston about DNA testing services and the consumer rights that they implicate. Republicans can call 202-748-8001, Democrats 202-748-8000, and Independents 202-748-8002. Now, Joel, consumers use this information for everything, just to find out where their family comes from, or sometimes to get some sort of health information. But how do these companies use this data that is submitted by consumers?
So the companies use it in a few ways. One, they use it to provide the service that they're advertising. They'll connect you with either missing relatives or provide some insight into your genetic background, but they're also using it in other ways. They're selling it to third-party companies, specifically medical research companies and pharmaceutical companies. These companies are scouring through the data in search of big blockbuster treatments, the cure for Alzheimer's or breast cancer or Huntington's disease. They're out there, and they believe on the basis of this big data of DNA collected from millions of individuals will give them the insights that will allow them to commercialize treatments for these different health issues.
Now, full disclosure, I've used one of these sites before to find out DNA history, but on it, as I was filling it out, there were lots of boxes that I was able to check to opt out of having that information distributed among others. Are there regulations that require these companies to allow consumers to opt out, or does it depend on the company itself?
There are no regulations that require them to give consumers the chance to opt out. Even with the big three companies, the ones that you would expect to be the most transparent, their terms and conditions are actually hidden across multiple different documents, and during the sale process, where you click in different boxes in different places to give your consent, oftentimes they'll ask for consent for medical research, and they'll make it sound as though it's for the public good, but it's actually private medical research that they're commercializing and selling.
All right. We have Barbara calling in from Texas on our independent line. Barbara, you're on with Joel Winston.
Hi, Mr. Winston. I'm one of those that I just turned in a DNA kit from 123, whatever it's called, Ancestry. But I'm wondering, I did check, I opt out on, them keeping my information or using it for medical reasons. And I'm wondering, are they really going to use it? Because there's quite a few of us African Americans or Black Americans that are tracing our roots back through slavery and trying to connect to the Hebrews in the Bible, because we know that the people in the Bible, they are black people because they run from Jerusalem to Egypt all the time to hide in the amongst the Africans, and then we eventually got sold into slavery. So can they use if I opted out and didn't give my consent for them to keep this, can they still use my DNA? I'm real concerned now.
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, and the answer is it depends. It really depends on the service that you used and what the terms are of the service and what was opted in or opted out. So if you opted out of the research portion of it, then they are, by their own terms, they are prohibited from sharing your DNA as part of research efforts. But again, that's upon themselves. That's their own enforcement, and each of these companies has portions of their policies that allow them to change their policies at any time, and it's up to the consumer to continuously go back and check and reread and make sure that the policy is still in line with what they want. So you may be familiar with the case of Henrietta Lacks, where genetic information was taken and used and commercialized for research against the knowledge of the individual. So unfortunately, there's really no clear answer other than to say that you have to pull up the terms and conditions of the service that you used and verify what it is that you opted out of.
Let's take a look at what Senator Schumer is calling for from the FTC. This report from the New York Post says Schumer said it was unclear what companies like Ancestry DNA do with all the data they collect from hair or saliva samples that clients eager to know if they're 20% Cherokee or have a genetic marker for a certain disease send in. Many don't realize that their sensitive information may end up in the hands of many third-party companies, Schumer said in a press conference in Manhattan on Sunday. There's no point in learning about your family tree if your privacy gets chopped down at the same time. Schumer said he's calling on the Federal Trade Commission to investigate especially since the makers of the kits have ramped up their marketing for the holidays. We have seen a lot of sales and ads about these things, so people getting them as holiday gifts for friends and family members. What could the FTC do if they choose to investigate and look into this?
Yeah, I think that Schumer is on the right track, but respectfully, he's slightly off. You have no privacy when it comes to these tests. When you submit one of these tests and you consent to their terms, you have waived all of your privacy. And what they are doing is entirely legal under contract law. The language of what they're doing is legal, but the problem and the reason that the FTC should look into this is that these companies are making false and misleading statements to the public about the control that they have. Rather than being fully transparent and confessing to what is really in the terms and conditions, they're using their PR machines to remind customers that they do have control over the DNA only if they consent do they give it up. But they don't really make clear that the purchase and the fulfillment of these orders is the consent.
Okay, William's calling in from Virginia on our independent line. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you today? I just wanted to call in because I just happened to see this gentleman, Joel, here, is talking about consumer rights and so forth. Real quick, I'll just tell you that in 1969, I bought an insurance policy after I graduated from high school. I was given, and I kept it. In 1983, I divorced. 2 years later, this insurance company sent me a form that said I needed to take a blood test for, if you can believe it or not, for AIDS, just because I got divorced. And so the end story was that the company that I had the original policy sold. The new company came in and tripled the policy, and I converted this into a type of policy for retirement funds. I did manage to get a little money out of them, but from data, just supposedly, I was forced to take a AIDS test, which I declined. They canceled my policy. I lost money. But that just shows you what can happen when people get your data. So thank you very much. Don't know if you want to comment on it or not, but that's my story.
Well, Joel, I want to add to that and say how, if any way, do HIPAA laws get implicated, laws that govern privacy of medical records and prohibit people from taking negative action against you based on those records? Do they apply here at all?
Yeah, so these are all absolutely great points. To start out, HIPAA does not apply. As soon as you consent to one of these companies, you lose any type of privacy rights that you may have had in protecting your own medical information. The caller mentioned in the 80s when companies used to ask people, they would target people based on lifestyle. Interestingly, he mentioned that it was a divorce that prompted the company to ask for additional blood work. So there are certain protections that exist now that didn't exist then. However, these regulations are patchwork and they don't provide an absolute protection. And the problem is that once you take one of these genetic tests and you get results back saying that you may be more likely for Alzheimer's or you may have a proclivity towards cancer or heart disease, the insurance companies can't yet get their hands on these tests directly, but they can ask you if you have taken these tests. And if you have taken them and if you have knowledge about what these results show, then you cannot give a false statement to a life insurance company about your health background. And so separately for health insurance, we know that pre-existing conditions used to exist. They have been outlawed, but there is a real threat that pre-existing conditions are coming back. And so health insurance companies are really eager to get this type of data and combine it with other type of medical credit reports that they have for you in order to underwrite you based on your genetic issues.
And we are joined from Pittsburgh by Joel Winston. He is a privacy and consumer rights attorney, and he is talking about the privacy issues implicated by the use of DNA testing kits and how regulators might respond to it. Now, and once again, Republicans 202-748-8001, Democrats 202-748-8000, and Independents 202-748-8002. Joel, I get your point that you can contract away your privacy rights here, but is there anything else the FTC can do? For example, can they require these companies to be more forthcoming about how this information is used, exactly where it can go, and what you can or cannot opt out of?
Yes, absolutely. The FTC does have the authority to require these companies to cease from making any type of misleading or deceptive statements about what their terms and conditions actually do. They can require that they be more prominent in their disclosures to consumers, and just at the very beginning level, they could require that all of these agreements and all of these terms exist on one single page. As it is now, if you wanted to read the privacy policies and the terms and conditions for these companies, you would have to go through and sift through multiple documents in multiple locations. So it's not even just the burden of actually reading the terms and understanding the terms. Consumers can't really even find these terms.
Okay, John's on the Republican line from Washington, D.C. You're on with Joel Winston.
Good morning. Good morning. I am currently proposing a new bill here in Washington, D.C. It's called the D.C. Recovery Act for living descendants of American slaves. As you know, the black American population in this country is a principal victim of identity theft. And the DNA feature of this new law that we're going to vote on here in the district and the rest of the country, or what we call reparations, but we're changing the name legally to recovery, will have to DNA test any person who's claiming benefits of this new act. And this will bring this lifelong discussion as to who we are related to. Because slavery, as many of us know, departed a lot of families. We have relatives that we might see every day, white, black, red, or yellow, and don't even know it. So this DNA feature, it sounds like you have a lot of people that are afraid to technically know that they have relatives of the opposite race, or ethnic origin here. I'd like to hear your comment on that.
Yeah, I think it would be concerning to have a centralized system to require people to give up their DNA. The answers that you get about your background and your ancestry, they're not clear. They're not cut and dry. It's all a gray area, and essentially the DNA of all individuals is connected in some way. When you take these tests, they're able to tell you based on general populations and general results, sort of parts of your background, but they're not doing it with micro specificity.
So, Joel, explain some ways that once these companies or third-party companies that they give this information to, once they get this information, how might they be used, and in what ways can they be used against consumers?
Yeah, so one of the big ways that they can be used against consumers is for life insurance, when you're trying to buy a life insurance policy or renew a life insurance policy. For health insurance, it may be possible for them to be used against you, as well as in the employment setting. There is not absolute protection in the workplace. And then also there's a concern about law enforcement. Your genetic information that you share with your close relatives can be subpoenaed and can be obtained by law enforcement through existing legal channels.
Okay, Katie's calling from Merrick, New York on our independent line. Good morning.
Good morning. My question is along the lines of like what you've been speaking about. I'm interested in, again, how transparent what they're collecting, their storage methods is. As, for example, like, is your demographic information tied to your personal information? That where it could, be tied, you could be excluded for employment from this larger database.
All right, Katie's breaking up a little bit, but I think the point that she brings up is, can they link the information that they get from your DNA to other information that they obviously have, like your address and potentially your employment or other things?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely they can. They have your name, they have your credit card, they have your address, they have your DNA. They keep the actual sample of DNA itself, and then they run the DNA through tests to produce reports and other information about the genome itself. But they do keep that sample on ice in the freezer. For some companies, you can actually request that they destroy the sample. I've talked to people who have requested that their sample be destroyed, and it was not easy for them to accomplish the destruction. They had to contact these companies multiple times, and then they were only left with the assurance from the company itself that the sample was destroyed and that their data was deleted.
And Joel, is that something too that the FTC could address, maybe create some, or even Congress create some sort of uniform system by which this kind of information would have to be destroyed?
They theoretically could. I think that the FTC, if they were able to identify individuals that had actually requested destruction of their data and were met with obstacles, they could most certainly pressure these companies to provide a more transparent process and to make sure that the customer service departments of these companies were able to quickly and effectively respond to the request to destroy the samples.
Joel, how do these issues interface with the Fourth Amendment? I mean, the law enforcement officials would need a warrant to get someone's DNA information, yet it seems like this information is much more readily available. Are there Fourth Amendment implications here?
There are certainly Fourth Amendment implications, but once you sign these consent forms, you circumvent any normal constitutional legal protection that you have. You have taken the DNA, the stuff from inside your own body, and turned it over to a third-party corporation. So these companies in their policies say that when it comes to law enforcement, they will only turn over data in response to actual valid legal warrants or subpoenas procured by a court, but they are allowed to change their terms. If they wanted to provide direct access to law enforcement, they could decide to do that.
And we are talking with Joel Winston, who is joining us live from Pittsburgh. He is a privacy attorney, also a former deputy attorney general for the state of New Jersey. And we are talking about DNA testing kits that people volunteer to learn more about their background and some of the consumer issues that can ensue from that. Joel, what about other kinds of tests, like the health information tests? Sometimes we see those being touted at NFL games. Are these other kinds of tests raising the same kind of privacy issues?
These tests also raise the same kind of privacy issues, and these tests themselves actually move into the realm of regulation by the Food and Drug Administration. When you make claims of medical benefit or of certain health information or diagnosis, then it falls into a different realm, which does have more regulation, but only about the claims that they're making. It does not impact any type of privacy or other issues.
Okay. John's calling in from Kingsport, Tennessee on our Democratic line. Good morning, John.
Morning. My question's more of a long-term, like a long-distance future type problem. When cloning becomes something that's more prevalent in our society, would this somehow, like you're giving up rights to your DNA, would that in turn lead to another type of, say, I don't know, slavery or involuntary servitude of those clones?
I can't speak to future technology that doesn't exist yet, but you touch on an interesting point. Only 13 or 14 years ago, to sequence a single genome, it cost $1 billion and took about 10 years. Now the cost is less than $1,000, and it can be done in a single day. So we're really just at the cusp of understanding what this technology is and what it can do. We're essentially in the Model T era, so we haven't really even hit the jet age as to what is possible with these technologies. So when you turn over your DNA now, they're keeping your sample, they're keeping the information that they've uncovered. If there are future technologies that allow them to explore DNA or to do things with DNA, or even clone DNA or use DNA as a service, or provide snippets of DNA to people, we don't know what the future holds. But you, in these contracts, you are giving away your rights in perpetuity for the length of your life and beyond.
Joel, other than just not taking these tests, what can people do to protect themselves?
you cannot take the test. If you take the test, you have no privacy. These companies have two choices with the way that they write their terms. They have chosen the way that gives them full ownership, complete ownership, without reporting back to you. And interestingly, all of the terms and conditions of these major companies contain arbitration agreements. So you agree to waive all of your legal rights, any access that you may have to a court, and any type of normal rule of law where if you discover in the future that they have broken the law against you, you have actually waived your legal right and would have to pursue it through a course of binding arbitration.
All right, Wynette is calling from East Peoria, Illinois, on our Republican line. Just a few seconds left with Joel Winston. Wynette, go ahead.
Hi, I have a question for Joel.
Go ahead.
And what that is, we just discussed this the other day, and I was talking about, what keeps them from doing this, taking our information and keeping it. And I just happened to be reading on the CDC website, and it was talking about actually just urine tests. And for the national health and nutrition tests that the government takes, they save our urine tests in a warehouse for 10 years. I just read that on the CDC website. So my question is, they've got biotechnology. They have a pill now called Abilify MySite, where there's an ingestible sensor where they can actually sense what's going on inside your body.
All right, Wynette, I don't want to cut you off, but we only have a few seconds left, and I want to give Joel a chance to address the fact, is the government collecting the same kind of information that these companies are?
I'm not sure the actual program that she's speaking to, but there is an interesting distinction. The government itself, and there are a number of regulations that would prohibit the government from using it or selling it or doing anything with it. When you give your test to a private company, the same rules don't apply, and you're agreeing by contract to give up the rights to your genetic information and to the associated genetic information of your relatives with whom you share the same DNA.
All right, Joel Winston, an attorney from Pittsburgh. You can reach him on Twitter at Joel Winston and find him at winstonlawllc.com. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And on tomorrow's Washington Journal, days after North Korea launches a new ballistic missile, Daryl Kimball, Arms Control Association Executive Director, will be here to discuss what it means for North Korea's nuclear weapon powers. And then American Conservative Union's Matt Schlapp will be here to discuss President Trump's performance and the Republican agenda. And Washington Post columnist Richard Cohen will be here to discuss his new documentary about Washington Post editor Ben Bradley and the state of the news media. That's all for today's Washington Journal. We'll be back at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Have a good day.